The state's top elections official is facing a campaign finance complaint over a mailer sent to North Idaho voters. Republican State Senate candidate Scott Herndon says Secretary of State Phil McGrane used the mailer to endorse legislative candidates without filing certain reports required under Idaho campaign finance law. But as Abby Wilt reports, McGrane says the mailers were below the reporting threshold and complied with state law.
And clearly, he doesn't have a line drawn that this is an ethical problem. But I would tell you that as a voter and as a candidate, I have a problem with this.
A North Idaho campaign mailer is now drawing attention far beyond the mailbox.
A lot of people in Bonner and Boundary County received a 6x11 mailed postcard from Secretary of State Phil McGrane.
Republican State Senate candidate Scott Herndon filed a formal complaint against Secretary of State Phil McGrane for sending out a mailer endorsing Herndon's opponent. The front of the mailer had a picture of McGrane, and the back had endorsements for two other candidates.
So it was essentially a campaign advertisement. And on the back side, up in this district, he was endorsing two candidates for the state legislature, and that would have been Mark Sauter and Jim Woodward.
But endorsing his opponent wasn't the main issue. Herndon says he is concerned with how McGrane paid for the mailers. Under Idaho law, if a candidate spends more than $1,000 on a candidate outside their own race, they must file a 48-hour notice of contribution through a campaign finance report. Herndon says based on his own experience with mailers, he assumes McGrane's were over $1,000, but can't confirm that. In the complaint, he says on average, if a mailer was sent in bulk to households in Bonner and Boundary counties, standard shipping rates would be 50 to 75 cents per piece and would exceed the basic reporting threshold.
We keep track of campaign finance report filings, and in this case, there was no independent expenditure report from Phil McGrane. A typical mailer is going to cost thousands of dollars, and so that would trigger the requirement to file.
But there's another option that McGrane could have filed under. That's called an in-kind donation, which means anything other than money was donated to a campaign. But even an in-kind donation requires a campaign finance report.
He actually considered the backside of the mailer where he was supporting two legislative candidates to be an in-kind donation. And that would also trigger a campaign finance report within 48 hours if that amount added up to $1,000. And on your typical mailer, that's probably going to happen.
But McGrane says the mailers were not above $1,000.
None of them were over $1,000. So I think, one, there's a perception that the mailer was much larger and more widespread than it was.
He says the mailers covered 26 different candidates, but the main focus was on him and his reelection.
I didn't get any discounts. Let's make that abundantly clear. I paid for the mailers through my campaign.
He also says in his role, he is allowed to endorse candidates and feels confident that he knows campaign finance laws and follows them.
I would say no one knows Idaho's campaign finance laws quite like I do, so I feel really comfortable in that process in terms of what I did. And that's just on the regulatory piece.
Since the complaint went to the Secretary of State's office, but is also against the Secretary of State, the State Attorney General's office will investigate it.
We already had put in place, because I was on the ballot this year, to work with the Attorney General's office. We work with them routinely on campaign finance issues.
McGrane says the state's campaign finance laws could use more transparency, so while he doesn't think he is in the wrong, he is hoping to make the rules clearer after this complaint.
Part of the system of having this is to hold people in this space accountable, whether it's donors, whether it's candidates, any of the participants. The public and the voters have a right to know. I go around the state talking about money in politics. My campaign is a part of that like everybody else's, and I actually think it's great that there's a complaint because I should be held accountable just like anybody else is.
In the complaint, Herndon is asking for the AG's office to investigate if McGrane made independent contributions toward Woodward and Sauter. He wants to determine the total cost of those mailers and require McGrane to submit an independent expenditure report on all of the mailers.
Yeah, and when it comes to some of those expenses, there's discussions about, okay, is it going to cost more to send those out as an individual group versus a government entity, because governments can get that cheaper rate. But according to McGrane, he said no. So that'll be interesting to see play out. But yeah, it seems like McGrane is willing to just watch this play out and is okay with whatever outcome it might be, just because it'll be more transparency for the voters.
Right. He says he knows what he did. He knows that he thinks it's under the law. He knows this law obviously very well. And so we'll see what comes of it.
Yeah. Abby, thank you.